So by now, everybody knows that there is a huge run-up for the Bitcoin ETF, and a lot of different companies are involved, Fidelity, BlackRock, and also ARK. And Cathie Wood, who is the head of ARK Investment, came out on Bloomberg and answered a couple different questions. And what she talked about was pretty eye-opening. She talks about how Bitcoin, what the catalyst was. She also talked about how their ETF stacks up against BlackRock. And she talked about, more importantly, just of the structure of the SEC and how it's actually weakening. And the article, or the interview piece, was pretty long, about 20 minutes. I'm just going to break it down in the top 3 or 4 pieces. And the first thing we're going to talk about, Cathie answers, is how things are going as far as what is the catalyst for Bitcoin since June. Where does she see things going? And then the interview asked another great question, which is Bitcoin a really good store of value, especially in this volatile market? So just take a listen.
Yes, I do think that in June, when BlackRock announced its filing, or when it was announced that BlackRock had filed for Bitcoin ETF, the Bitcoin price did shoot up, but has been fairly stable since then. So I do think it's had an impact. A bigger impact this year was the regional bank crisis. It was very interesting to watch Bitcoin go from 19,000 to 30,000 right in the middle of that banking crisis as regional banks were going bankrupt. So it was a flight to safety. So I thought that move was just as interesting.
Hang on, a flight to safety? Is buying Bitcoin somehow a flight to safety? Isn't it a little too volatile for that?
Well, if you think about it, Bitcoin serves as 2 kinds of hedges. One is a hedge against inflation and outright confiscation of wealth. The other is against counterparty risk. And, when the regional banks started going down, this fear sort of, our memories are fresh with 08, 09, the counterparty risk became real. And so there was this flight into Bitcoin, a completely decentralized, transparent network, which is not subject to counterparty risk.
Yeah, so I have to agree with her. It makes total sense, right? BlackRock ETF comes in, price goes up, people are excited. Then, of course, we have a bank collapse, and there's a flight to safety. But the reason that I left this in is because as we move forward, especially in our 4-year cycle, I still believe that the 4-year cycles are intact. They've been doing pretty good for the last 13 or so years. And of course, next year, we'll see a halving in 2024. Then 2025, there should be, or I'm hoping there's a reasonable bull run. It could happen in 2024 or 2025, quite honestly, depending on who you're listening to. So when she talks about this flight to safety and it's a good store of value, I bring this up because you're going to get this question from people that you talk to about Bitcoin and crypto and digital assets. They're going to say, this doesn't make any sense. How can this be a store of value when it's so darn volatile? And then if you just want to make it very super simple, just show them this little graphic here. $20, 1980 could get you a ton of groceries. 2000 couldn't get you much. And right now in 2023, how much can $20 get you at the grocery store? It just depends. Now, take a look at 2011 when, Bitcoins were $20 back in the day. And then 10 years later, you could buy in 2021 a very nice car. And in 2030, who knows? So as far as like a store of value, yes, it's volatile. But as time moves on, we can see how it actually preserves wealth. So moving on that, the next question they're going to talk about is the ETF timeline and who will get approved first, and does it really matter? And just as a point of reference, these are all the different companies that have actually gone into to be filing for this ETF. So ARK, iShares, Bitwise, of course, iShares is BlackRock, Bitwise, VanEck, WisdomTree, Fresco, Fidelity, and Valkyrie. And you see that these are the dates that were filed in June wow. Bitwise was October of 2021. Let's see how that works out. But all of them are right in this general range. So the first deadline for ARK has come and gone. And I always think it's interesting that it's like a deadline, but it's not a deadline. They're just going to ask for consumer feedback. And of course, they just push it to the second, then the third, and then the fourth. So ARK is the first one here. And if they don't get approved by January 10th, 2024, then that's it. It's done. and then all the rest of them, it's all about March 15th to the 19th. And that also includes BlackRock, which is March 15th, 2024. So we know that there is a time frame of when this can be approved or not approved. So just look out for these dates, and I will link this in the description below so you can find it very easily. So now let's get to the point where she's asked specifically about these ETF timelines and how things stack up.
That August 13th will come and go, and I think the SEC, if it's going to approve a Bitcoin ETF, will approve more than one at once.
So great. So again, what she is saying is we totally expect this to go through the process, and we expect us to blow through that deadline of August 13th. Today it is August 8th, 2023, and they don't expect that second deadline to do anything. They think it's going to go to the third and the final deadline, and that could be for everybody. But what was interesting is that she states that once one gets approved, they all get approved, and I have to agree. But it just is getting over that hump as far as which one is actually the first one to get approved. And then next to last, she's going to talk about, I think this is the most interesting piece, which is the SEC is actually getting weaker and the reasons behind that. So just take a listen.
The two other branches of government, the judicial branch and the legislative branch, are giving the SEC pause because the SEC is losing cases in court having to do with its regulations around crypto. That's the first thing. And there are bills that are making their way through the House and are seeing some bipartisan support. So I do believe that Gary Gensler, I guess last week or 10 days ago, said something like, well, I'm not the only one who makes this decision. There are 5 commissioners. Now, of course, we know they're weighted towards the Democrats, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And so one assumes that the way that Gary votes is the way the FCC will vote. But he seemed to be distancing himself a little bit. And so maybe we can take that as a bit of a clue.
We definitely did. We thought that was a good sign, but we're reading all kinds of tea leaves in this.
So right, I couldn't agree more. I think the SEC has definitely been weakened, especially with the case against Ripple and them losing that decision by Judge Torres. But one of the things we talked about was the SEC and who actually is appointing them, and of course their different political affiliations. Now she did say 5, and she said it exactly correct. There are 3 Democrats. That's Gary Gensler, Carolyn Crenshaw, and Jaime Lizarraga, or maybe Jamie Lizarraga. I don't know the exact pronunciation of the name. And then, of course, there are 2 Republicans, Mark Ueda, and of course, crypto mom Hester Pierce, who's been very vocal that she is very pro crypto, digital assets, and especially Bitcoin. So we can see that we have 3 against 2, essentially. And now there are some different bills that are being reached across the aisle, and looks like Democrats and Republicans are actually moving forward in the same direction on some limited cases. That is very true. However, this is one of the reasons why I'm very skeptical that this ETF will actually be approved, especially with what Kathy's going to say in a little bit about the futures ETFs, which is, to me, if you have a futures ETF and you approve that, but you can't do a spot ETF, I believe that there's more risk as far as manipulation for the futures ETF. And because we know that, there's no reason why Gary Gensler shouldn't have approved a spot ETF by now. And then also, if you understand that we have a democratic election, or a presidential election coming up next year, you know that they want to, of course, remain in power. And if you have seen the last 2 different reports that have come out from the White House itself, this one being the Comprehensive Framework for Responsible Development of Digital Assets, and this next one, which is Climate and Energy Implications of Crypto Assets, you will know that they are not very positive about, Bitcoin and digital assets in general. Even though Gary will say quite emphatically that Bitcoin is not a security, there's also this other thing about the energy consumption. And of course, he is always talking with Elizabeth Warren, and she is a big negative crypto and building crypto army and so on and so forth. So again, I don't think this is a slam dunk that people think it may be, and that's why I've been talking about. But to finish this up, and this was probably the second best point that she makes, which is about the ETF itself is Coinbase Is the Coinbase surveillance enough and market manipulation to move forward? So just take a listen.
What I find so interesting still, and this is why we believe that the SEC will lose the grayscale case. How can you approve a Bitcoin futures ETF and not a Bitcoin ETF? And in fact, if you're really thinking about consumer protection, a futures ETF is swap space. So there's counterparty risk there that you would not have with a Bitcoin ETF, which is backed 1-to-1 with Bitcoin in Coinbase's cold storage. It still confounds me.
Not to mention the point that Eric makes, which is that if there had been an ETF, a lot of people wouldn't have bought Bitcoin at FTX.
That was a pretty good takedown on that last piece. You know, you have to agree. If Gary and the gang, if they would have gotten together and actually approved this spot Bitcoin ETF, then a lot of people wouldn't have actually lost a lot of their funds and Bitcoin with FTX and a host of other issues. So I know that Gary is big about consumer protections and protecting everybody and protect us harder. But in all honesty, what has Gary done so far while he's in office? And I got to tell you, it hasn't been that much. So anyhow, let me know what you think about that in the comments section. And then last piece is just to note that over at CoinGecko, I found this pretty interesting. CoinGecko is pretty cool. I do like using it. I use it all the time. It's free and it just shows us like the different price action that's going on with crypto itself. But did you know that when you go to CoinGecko.com and if you click on very up here, it says categories. Click on categories. And you can come over here. I like how it's got all the different things where you can see like layer 1s, layer 2s, exchange-based tokens. And this one they just added. I found this quite funny. I mean, a little depressing as well. But it says alleged SEC security. So if you ever want to just figure out what the heck Gary was talking about as far as all the different cryptos that they've named as securities. Now, they haven't directly named these things. They are just lawsuits against these different exchanges. But they've stated these are what they consider securities. You can see that they've done some pretty big damage to a lot of different cryptos. And we're still actually holding up pretty darn strong moving forward. And look at all these things, man. They wasted no time to get going, and yeah, unfortunately, these are the ones that bite the bullet. So, congratulations, Gary. You guys are really protecting us harder. So, thanks so much. And then also two public service announcements. This one was from CZ Binance. This is something that I do and I need to stop doing, and I need you to know about this. And this was a tweet he sent out yesterday. He says the scammers are so good now that they generate addresses with the same starting and ending letters, which is what most people check for when doing a crypto transfer. I got to tell you, that's exactly what I do. I just look at the first three. I'm like 0x15 and then F452. I'm like, great, that's it. But that is the wrong thing to do, and you need to be aware of this. So here's what happened. Scammer will use this address to send you dust transactions. So the address is shown in your wallet. So what they'll do is they'll make the exact same looking address with the first four and the last four, but in the middle they'll just rearrange some things so it looks like the same thing. So if you want to send to the legitimate address, you might just pick one previous transaction in your wallet, copy the address. This is what happened yesterday to a very experienced crypto operator. So they just looked at in their wallets and said, oh, I've already sent to this one. I remember this one, 0x53, and the last four is F257. Great, they send it off and it goes to a scammer, unfortunately. And this last part is kind of concerning, quite honestly. He states a positive ending for this one. The operator noticed the error right after the transaction, and we were able to request the USDT to be frozen, or tether to be frozen in time. So I think we've all known about this in the past, that there is this ability for different stable coins to be halted, to be frozen. So if you think that everything's great in cryptoverse, it's not so. And lastly, our last PSA for the day. There's Simon. Look at Simon. And Simon Dixon from Bank of the Future, had him on the show for many a time. He's trying to do his best for everybody as far as with the Celsius people who got screwed over, like myself and you. And he's saying there's a pledge of support as a Celsius creditor. There's a video he talks about. And what this is all about is about the committee and there's a lack of, and he talks about here, the lack of clarity about the tax consequences of the plan. There's different plans for ad hoc earn and for different people who were in Celsius. Lack of transparency, the government provision the plan, liquidation process, and he's talking about how this might be not the best thing, litigation recovery process, and a whole host of different things. Lack of detail of the $2 billion claim against FTX. So he's saying that the lawyers who are putting this forward are not doing a great job. So he wants you to come over here, review the video, see if you want to do this, and just fill out this form. Just pledge it, say, hey, we want more clarity before we make a decision as Celsius owners. So that is the PSAs for the day, and you can find the link in the description. But that's it for this episode.